Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Tactical Breakdown series, the show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal in a statistical and analytical way with the help of some expert insight. I'm very happy today to be joined by Alvaro Romeo. How you doing, mate? You good, Joel?
Yeah, very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. How are you, Tom?
Yes, very good, mate. Very good. You're joining us live from TalkSport Studios,
Yeah.
of course, where you produce plenty of content and commentary on Spanish football. But you also do plenty of work for the Totally Football Show. So, for those that aren't familiar, I know you've been on the channel before plenty of times, but for those that aren't familiar with your work, just let people know what it is exactly you do.
Well, I've got kind of a double life here, double identity. I cover the Premier League in Spanish for our Spanish and South American syndication partners, and I am a commentator. And then I cover La Liga in English for English media outlets, for example, the BBC as a freelancer, obviously the Athletic and the Totally Football Show, and also as a freelancer as well. And yeah, I've been doing this for about 13 years now, so I can say that I am quite old, but I've been in the know for a while. Yeah.
No, lovely stuff. No, it's always good to get the backgrounds so people are more familiar with stuff. And we're here, of course, to talk today about Joao Felix, Portuguese international Atletico Madrid forward, who is being very heavily linked with an exit from Atleti, with Arsenal being one of the main key people involved, or rather one of the key clubs involved in discussions about him. So for today's show, to run you through some ideas of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking a bit about how he rose to significance and how things have kind of fallen away a little bit in Spain, how he plays, his best position, look at some statistical comparison to some of the players that we've also been linked to, as well as the existing players at Arsenal, how he might fit in at the club, and ultimately, is he worth that huge price tag and huge loan fee that's being associated with him? So to kick things off, talk to me, Alvaro, about kind of your view of Joao Felix, his rise, of course, big, massive move to Benfica, and where we kind of are now with the player.
Well, I think that Joao Felix was one of the most promising players in Europe, like 4 years ago. And Atletico Madrid did a very unlikely investment, in my opinion, which was signing Joao Felix, because normally Atletico doesn't spend that big for a player. But the truth is that they knew that they were going to get some money for Antoine Griezmann, and then they went for Joao Felix, despite him being 19 years old, despite him having had only one good season in European football with Benfica. Atletico invested a lot of money in the signing, not in the wages of Joao Felix, because I think that there is a little bit of a disproportion between how much Atletico paid for the guy and how much Joao is making. His wages are very far away from the wages of some other European superstars, and I think rightly so. Just by looking at the numbers and the performances of Joao Felix, we have seen glimpses of his talent. I think that he was very important for Atletico to clinch the title in 2021. But for a number of factors, I think that the guy hasn't been up to the price tag they paid for him. And basically, inconsistency and a lack of understanding with Simeone have been two things that have marked his stint at Atletico de Madrid.
When I look at Atletico Madrid, you remember back to the times where they're getting into regular Champions League finals and far into the Champions League, of course, winning the title in the early 2010s as well. It was their industriousness, their physicality. They were a bit of an anti-club to kind of the competition, if you like, with all of the tricky, fancy passing and play of Barcelona, of course, the quality of Real Madrid as well. And that stood them in good stead quite often against those sides. It felt like towards the mid-2010s and late 2010s that Simeone wanted to try and shift a bit by bringing in more technical players like Joao, like Thomas Lemar, for instance. And it's not necessarily worked out. Do you think that he's a bit of a victim of that attempt by Simeone to become a more technical club?
A little bit, yeah. I think that the main point here is that when Simeone tries to use Joao Felix a lot and gives a start to Joao Felix, he doesn't believe 100% in that idea. I think that conceptually speaking, Joao Felix and Simeone are very far away from each other. This is not saying that players like Joao Felix haven't worked for Simeone at some stage. You probably remember the likes of Adrian, Arda Turan, even Thomas Lemar at some extent. But those players come and go for Simeone. They don't spend 4 years. They are never the best players on paper that the team have. Arda Turan, for example, he was basically, doing the creativity, but in that Super Atletico, Radamel Falcao, Diego Costa, some other players, Thiago, were very important. But here, the problem is that Atletico de Madrid doesn't have these big names aside of Joao Felix. So the responsibility falls on him. And I don't think that Joao Felix has been able to take it every time. And then, the thing is that the points I'm going to make today are very ambivalent, because I also blame Simeone a little bit, because he's placing Joao Felix very far away from the opponent's goal. Joao Felix doesn't have the autonomy of Kylian Mbappe, for example, to name the best possible example, to take the ball 50 yards away from his box and to be able to finish it off himself. Joao Felix is not this player. The closer he is to the opponent's box, the better. So I think that Joao hasn't been given the consistency, and you have to blame him a little bit, but you also have to blame Simeone probably a little bit too, because he hasn't created the right environment for Joao Felix to shine.
Yeah, lovely stuff. In terms of his style of play, you've mentioned a little bit there in terms of he's much better when he's nearer the goal. And I agree with you in that sense. Absolutely, he can work with the ball at his feet. He can dribble. He can drive with it. He's very versatile as well. I mean, when we talk about, we're going to kind of combine this with his best position as well. He's played all over the field for Atletico Madrid and Benfica previously as well. What do you kind of see him stylistically, and what do you believe him to be his best role?
His best role could be a number 10, or if you play in a 4-4-2, for example, playing with another striker. I think that could be his preferred position. He wouldn't be bad either in a 4-3-3, of course. But I think that the midfielders and the defense have to be very close to him. So if Atletico or if any side plays as a unit and the block is very compact, I think that Joao Felix is going to be benefited by that. If the team the lines are very far away from each other, and the defense, the strikers, and the midfield are not having good connections, then Joao Felix will suffer, because, as I said before, he's not a man who can actually take the ball and run many meters with it. He has done it sometimes, yes, but physically he is not that strong to do this continuously. So this is the thing. So I think that if he played as a number 10 in a team that tends to dominate, have the possession and attack, he will be very happy. I think that the modern football doesn't create these positions that much anymore, as we saw during the World Cup. And if he played on the left in a 4-3-3 that worked well, like, for example, the Manchester City's 4-3-3, I think that he will be a very happy man too. If a team created those conditions, that environment for Joao Felix, and if he wouldn't perform, then all the responsibility will be on him, of course. But right now, I think that part of the responsibility of his sometimes poor performances, like yesterday against Barcelona, is on Simeone too.
I think that what's interesting, I think what Arsenal fans are immediately going to be thinking when you say that is, well, we're kind of looking at bringing in, say, Mykhailo Mudryk, who's very much a left winger, and Joao Felix is said to be what Arsenal want. And you'd imagine if that's the case, that Felix, if he's better on the left or better in a 2, that doesn't necessarily fit immediately into my mind as an obvious candidate, because most people would be looking at Felix and going, well, if we're bringing him in, it would be to play instead of Gabriel Jesus or instead of Eddie Nketiah in that number 9 role. Is there a struggle then, do you think, that Arsenal might have using him as a sole number 9 if they choose to use him there?
I tell you what, Tom, I think that if you want an immediate impact from Joao Felix, I don't think that that's going to happen at Arsenal. Seriously, I don't think so. Because, look at Mikel Arteta. He doesn't replace Martinelli and Saka very much. Neither Nketiah right now. True, Gabriel Jesus is out, but also there are no other wingers in the squad. But also Mikel Arteta doesn't change or swap these guys unless it's totally necessary. He really believes in them. And I think that Joao Felix will need an adaptation period at Arsenal, because the intensity that Arsenal is playing with is nowhere near the intensity that Atletico is playing with. That's number 1. And number 2, because Joao Felix doesn't have such a clear profile to play on the wings as Saka or Martinelli. Both are wingers. Joao Felix can play in the winger position. And then if you want to use him where Nketiah plays, for example, Joao Felix will have to hold the ball a little bit better, will have to be a little bit more physical. So, I think that he will have to adapt, and he will have to learn to play in some position for Arsenal. Probably Emile Smith-Rowe will be like a good person to look at and to say, look, this guy adapted somehow. Well, I will have to adapt the way this guy plays. But, I think that the immediate impact with Joao Felix is something that you wouldn't be getting if you sign him.
We're going to circle back to that when we come to the verdict on this, because that's very interesting indeed. Now, in terms of comparisons, with him being brought in and looked to be brought in as a player that would be in competition with the likes of Gabriel Jesus and other players who've been linked to. Although, hearing a lot from what Alvaro has said, maybe it wouldn't be as straightforward as that. But we're going to look at him compared to the likes of Jesus, Vlahovic, of course, a very more typical number 9, and then Marcus Thuram, who's played both centrally and in a wide area like Joao Felix has as well. So they're the players who've been linked to. So looking at comparisons, obviously, immediately see from the heat map, we showed you the heat map to the last 3 seasons just a few seconds ago. Felix does tend to choose to skew more towards the left-hand side when he does play. And Jesus, in fact, does tend to skew all over the field, but does tend to favour kind of moving towards the left and supporting Martinelli, perhaps because of the space occupied by Saka and Ødegaard on that right-hand side. But going into the actual kind of goal contributions, Alvaro, he comes out really well, despite maybe not being considered as being in the best of form or in the best situation with Atletico this season. He has 0.48 goal contributions per 90, the goal or an assist, which is better than Jesus, better than Thuram, and better than Vlahovic. Are people underrating him maybe this season, despite the struggles he's supposedly had?
No, I think that the rating we have of Joao Felix is more or less balanced. Really,
Yeah.
I really think so, Tom. Anyway, but I see at those spot-on statistics, and you look at Gabriel Jesus, and the truth is that is Mikel Arteta that concerned about the goals and assists that Gabriel Jesus was offering the team? Because I think that, for example, the pressure up front that he's doing is priceless. Gabriel Jesus, I was in Stamford Bridge watching Chelsea Arsenal, and Chelsea didn't know how to cope with Gabriel's pressure. And I think that Joao Felix cannot do that. Then Dusan Vlahovic, Marcus Thuram, they are totally different profiles to Joao Felix. So we're talking about very different players here. But the contribution, scoring-wise, of Joao Felix hasn't been that good for Atletico de Madrid. Yes, at Benfica, I think he scored 19, 20 goals in one season. He was 19 years old, and that was incredible. It was like, wow, this guy is going to hit from now on 20 goals per season every season in his career. Hasn't been like this. Joao Felix has scored 34 or 35 goals in 3.5 seasons for Atletico de Madrid. So this points in the direction of maybe Joao Felix is not the kind of guy who is going to win you the games from in the scoring department. I mean, he can make a massive contribution. The potential is there. The creativity is there. But maybe some other guys will have to score. In fact, Atletico de Madrid last night against Barcelona produced 20 shots and they didn't score a goal. And Joao Felix was involved in a very big capacity as well. So I think that he's not a great scorer. I mean, he has scored important goals, like last season, for example, against Manchester United in the Championship to knock out Manchester United, but he's not a great scorer either. So my question again is, yes, he's got the potential, but does Arsenal want to sign right now, maybe on loan, maybe as a transfer, a player that won't necessarily have an immediate impact? I'm very doubtful about that.
Yeah, again, we'll circle back to that with the verdict, because I've got some interesting questions regarding that as well. In terms of shot taking, it kind of falls in comparison with the rest of the guys in our comparison here. 3.32 shots per 90. Accuracy falls similarly around the others as well, 48.7%. His shots tend to be taken from, well, a mix of both in and outside the box. He's not afraid to shoot from outside of the area by any means. And then looking at kind of how he is on the ball, we talked a little bit earlier about how he's better close to the goal, but again, he's not afraid to take the ball when he's given the opportunity to. 5.1 dribbles per 90 and succeeding 35% of the time, which is the lowest, which I guess does kind of fall into what you were saying earlier on, with the lowest success rate of dribbles. Despite he doesn't mind having the confidence to dribble, he's not necessarily as successful as say Jesus at 49.1%, and who is dribbling still significantly more so than Joao Felix. Now, creatively, that's where I really want to ask you on as well, because creatively, Arteta wants forwards that can only, as you mentioned earlier with Jesus, when he's not scoring for 12 games in a row, Arteta's not concerned, because the performance outside of the goals and the assists that he brings is still so important. So creatively, whilst he may not, you feel, have an immediate impact, is this someone you feel that can still add and think about his teammates in such a kind of conscientious way that Arteta would appreciate that style of footballer?
He would. I really think so. He has to probably keep the work rate that Simeone is asking him to have. Number one, the creativity is there, and Mikel Arteta, I think that he will be very happy to have a player like this. the passes into the box success is all right. I think that he's got a big level of creativity as well. Sometimes he sees passing lines that not every player can see, that's for sure. His scoring contribution is all right, but it's not brilliant either. So I think Mikel Arteta will be happy with a player like this. Yes, of course. But on the other hand, there is an element that we haven't spoken about here, Tom, as well, which is like, aside from these numbers and all that, how keen is Atletico to let him go? Because this is a very important thing, because let's not forget that Atletico de Madrid lost this winter Mateus Cunha. And right now they've got Morata, Antoine Griezmann, Joao Felix, and Angel Correa. And none of them are scoring many goals. Antoine Griezmann has dropped back a little bit and he's playing more like a midfielder. Alvaro Morata is a continuous and never-ending stop and go. He goes through rough patches and then he scores like 3 or 4 goals in a month, and you are like, well, he's back, but he's never completely back. So I think that Joao Felix right now, despite everything I have said, and despite the fact that Simeone doesn't trust him 100%, Joao Felix is an asset for Atletico de Madrid, and Atletico will be very reckless if they let him go. And they don't have any other player who is going to be signed straight away just to replace him. They are talking about Borja Iglesias, who brings a totally different profile to Joao Felix because he's a physical guy. But if Borja Iglesias or any other player are not going to Atletico de Madrid, I don't think that Simeone will be happy to lose Joao Felix and to keep in the squad only 3 strikers, Antoine Griezmann, Angel Correa, and Alvaro Morata. Even though Atletico is playing only 2 competitions right now, Copa del Rey and La Liga, I don't think that 3 strikers are enough. No way.
It's really, because obviously when they play that 2-striker system, they're going to need the extra. Like, you think from an Arsenal perspective, people are going, well, we need 3 strikers, because at the moment we've only got 2, Jesus and Nketiah. You've got Martinelli that maybe could play there, but we play in the 4-3-3. We don't need to think as much about having as many centre-forward options as what Atletico Madrid are going to need. So it's absolutely a fair point. In terms of how he then fits into the Arsenal team, just to kind of give some examples about what we've seen both for Atleti and for Portugal. And what I would say is the Portuguese examples I'll come on to in a second are really quite telling. He loves finding the space in the box. There's a great opportunity here where he spots the space that's available. The pass is played and he's immediately running into that space in behind, finding that space and getting on the end of the pass. He actually doesn't look to shoot in this example. He finds a back pass to the running in Antoine Griezmann, and eventually it works out that he somehow gets a header in against Elche. Heading is actually a weird part of his game where he manages to pop up with a couple of headers a season. You wouldn't typically associate that maybe with someone like him, but he still is kind of determination to get into these really good areas in the box. And the tenacity that he has is imperative. I mean, this at the World Cup against Ghana, the pass that came through on the right-hand side this time, again, highlighting his versatility, and then the finish as well. He is someone that is determined to try and get into the box and score goals at the same time.
That's why, Tom, I don't write him off completely. Not at all. The potential and the creativity are there. And he has scored 19, 20 goals in his breakthrough season. So, again, that has happened already. It just hasn't happened for 3.5 years now. But the context is very important as well. He has been playing for Atletico de Madrid. And who is the last Atletico de Madrid player who was a very good passer from open play? Who is the last one? I cannot name that guy because Rodrigo de Paul arrived in Atletico de Madrid with that role, and he's been playing very far from the box. And Rodrigo de Paul has been a little bit sloppy for Atletico. Koke is no longer that guy. Maybe Antoine Griezmann. Saul, I think that he was meant to be more of a box-to-box midfielder, not necessarily one that gave the best possible passes, a creative one. But Atletico hasn't had that profile. If Joao Felix played in a side that had a couple of really good passers, his numbers will automatically increase. I don't have any doubt about that. So that you are showing, those graphics are very good as well, because he's doing the right runs many times. Then when he gets the ball in the box, sometimes you see that he doesn't have the killer instinct of some other striker. Like in the previous slide you were showing, Joao didn't take the shot. He just gave the pass. And sometimes maybe he should be a little bit more egotistic instead of altruistic in the opponent's box. But I think that, the moves are there, the potential is there. He has learned a lot at Atletico de Madrid. His work ethics have improved since he works for Simeone. Not enough in Simeone's eyes, but definitely they have improved. So, I think that as I said before, he's a player that the best is still to come. I still believe that. I still believe that.
I was trying to think of the most creative Atletico player while you were talking there, and ironically, I don't think they're even a midfielder. It was arguably Kieran Trippier was probably one of the most creative players they had.
100%, 100%. When they won the title in 2021, Kieran Trippier was the one who was putting more crosses in the box, and actually his vision was fantastic. You know, you have to go back to maybe I'm talking about Arda Turan in 2015, 2014, 2013 to find like a really, really good, skillful player who actually had a really good vision. That's a long time ago.
A long time ago. Yeah, it's mad to think how much consistency in the squad there's been in some senses of certain players, but then how much inconsistency in terms. I mean, strikers in particular, of course. Atleti have gone through so many in the past decade plus, but yeah, it's they're a team that I think needs probably an entire refresh. The argument about Diego Simeone's continuation will continue onwards, and whether or not he is the right guy, because it's similar, I suppose, to Arsenal with Arsene Wenger and Man United with Sir Alex Ferguson. Can you see a future beyond such a long-standing coach? And that's the question that Atleti are going to have to ask themselves. Whether Joao Felix, of course, there is another question. But we talk about his creativity. A great example here against Nigeria in the warm-up games for Portugal. This pass into Bruno Fernandes was sublime. In behind the Nigerian defence, you see him there getting the ball in. Fernandes waited perfectly, takes it around the goalkeeper, can't find the finish. But it's those types of examples of his vision that you can see sometimes. If he develops that, he could become a really creative kind of second striker for maybe, I say second striker, Erdegaard plays obviously in this hybrid 8/10 kind of role. Maybe Joao Felix could drop in and play a false 9 and allow Saka and Martinelli to maybe run beyond him, and that enable him to be more creative. So kind of the verdict is where we're at to finish off the show. Is he worth the money? Because the money being discussed, Alvaro, is kind of crazy for a 6-month loan deal. We've seen reports of a 21 million euro package, including wages and loan fee. There's been suggestions that Atletico might come down on that valuation, but they obviously still want a significant fee. We've seen some suggestions that they would be willing to include a £70 million option in the summer to take him permanently. With all of the noise and all of the money being talked about, where does your head kind of rest on what Arsenal should be thinking about with Joao Felix financially?
This is the question. I think that Joao Felix is way more suited for a transfer than for a 6-month loan. 100% about that. I spoke before about the immediate impact. I think that Joao Felix will have to adapt to Arteta, to his system. Arsenal is playing in a very different way to Atletico de Madrid. And I think that the loan wouldn't be the most clever move if the loan is that expensive. I think that cannot end up well because, Joao Felix hasn't been the kind of guy who, under big pressure, has had the rebellion to become a better player. In fact, he needs the things to go his way in order to perform. So I think that the loan, it wouldn't be the best option. I think that the buy-in would be a better one. If the loan is cheap, which probably it won't, then of course he will be a new tool for Mikel Arteta, maybe the Europa League and the FA Cup. Well, let's see, because Arsenal may play against Manchester City. Yeah, let's see about that.
City,
It could be, but maybe the cup or the tournaments can be a good moment or a good platform for Joao Felix to adapt, of course. But I wouldn't advise an expensive loan. No, not at all. I think that Joao Felix needs a pre-season with a big team to have a fresh look, a fresh start, and to incorporate ideas from a very good manager like Mikel Arteta. But in the middle of the season, there is no time for that. How many good trainings does Arsenal have from February onwards? If they are going to progress in the Europa League, in the FA Cup, and if they are going to be fighting for the title and they have to do regeneration and all that, maybe on Mondays they don't train and all that, how much time is there for Joao Felix to adapt? That's the thing. So, no, I wouldn't advise expensive loan. Not at all, Tom.
Yeah, I agree. And when I look at, if he was to say, come in this week, you've got the North London derby on Sunday, you're then playing against Manchester United the following week. Eddie Nketiah starts both of those games. Like, Joao Felix doesn't come in and start because, as you said, he's got to adapt. He's got to come in and show that he can play in this new Arsenal system. And then you're thinking, well, where is he going to get the games? The Europa League doesn't start until March. You might get games in the FA Cup, but we've got City, as you say, if we get past Oxford tonight in the next round. It's very, very difficult to see where his minutes are immediately going to come from. And all of a sudden, he's kind of in the same problem he's got at Atleti, where he's not starting enough games consistently to get enough consistently up to play well. It's really tricky. What I'll throw to you kind of lastly to round off is that one of the big talking points around the finances is some people say that if Arsenal want to win a title, they have to be ruthless in the market. And Joao Felix is the type of player that we should absolutely be investing big in, even if it's for a loan, because he could be the difference between Arsenal winning a title or not. For me, I don't think Joao Felix in these 6 months alone is the difference between Arsenal winning a title or not, because he's just, as you said there's not enough time to adapt. If Arsenal do sign him on loan, it has to be with an option, as you say, for the long term to invest in him. But I mean, is there an argument that even in the time that's remaining, if they did get an option on that contract, that he couldn't do enough to convince Arsenal to sign him on that long-term deal?
That's the thing, Tom, that the clock will be ticking from the very minute that he lands at Colney. And that's the thing. It's only 6 months. And that's why I would advise, if anything, like a long investment on a player like Joao Felix, because the potential is there. But from the very profiles that you have been showing me and all that, I mean, obviously a player like Dusan Vlahovic, imagine, he will have a more brutal impact because, it's a player that maybe doesn't need the team to play too well to score his goals. You just send it in the box, and Dusan Vlahovic is very self-sufficient. Whereas Joao Felix will have to adapt to a structure that is working very well so far, that he will have to adapt. And I don't think that on his own, he's capable of raising his hand and saying, here I am. I think that he needs a little bit more of help from his teammates. So, yeah, back to the original question. I think that it would be definitely a risk if you got Joao Felix in the middle of January. And especially if all the pressure falls on his shoulders. He has proven that he's not the guy who deals best with the pressure. He's still young, still 23 years old, but there are also reasons to doubt a little bit him.
So in the verdict, I think loan, probably no. Long-term contract, probably yes. But is that what Arsenal need this January? That's the question. And I think we can agree that Arsenal need to make sure whoever they bring in can provide an immediate impact for what is a really important season. Alvaro, thank you so much, mate, for your time. I really, really appreciate it. Tell people where they can find you if they want to follow your stuff.
Yeah, of course. I mean, my Twitter account is there, so at Alvaro _Romeo. And then, as I said before, the Totally Football Show or TalkSport International, those are the platforms that I am in. So, thank you for having me, Tom. It's been a pleasure. As usually, I like to talk about football with you. Good insight.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate it. That's why I get you on, because you're my number one Spanish guy for all of that stuff, and very insightful. I can see you've got lots of really kind comments in the chat box throughout the show. Sorry, we've not had time for questions. We've covered a lot of stuff in today's show, which I think you can agree has been very insightful. Leave your comments down below as to what your thoughts are now on Joao Felix. Have they changed based on what Alvaro has told us in today's show? Are you very much still stubbornly sticking by your points? Let us know. As I say, drop a like, subscribe, follow us on Twitter, follow Alvaro as well, and we'll be back very soon with another show. And as always, up the Arsenal.